Blood tastes remarkably like copper pennies, but heartbreak tastes like cheap Prosecco. That was my exact thought at my sister's engagement party. She was wearing my dream dress, flashing my grandmother's diamond, and kissing the man I spent 4 years loving. Chase. She stole him, clean and simple. What she didn't know, what none of them knew as they toasted to the happy couple, was the dark, terrifying secret sitting at the head of the banquet table. I was already sleeping with his father. Biting the inside of my cheek was a bad habit I picked up the day my life fell apart, and right now I was chewing the tissue raw. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the rented VFW hall, casting a jaundiced yellow glow over the crepe paper streamers Chloe had insisted on hanging. The room smelled like a nauseating mixture of overcooked chicken, stale beer soaked into the floorboards, and my sister's signature vanilla perfume, a scent that now made my stomach violently pitch. I stood near the lukewarm buffet, gripping a plastic cup of Prosecco so tightly the sides were beginning to crack. Across the room, Chloe threw her head back, laughing at something Chase had whispered. Her blonde hair, perfectly curled, bounced against her bare shoulders. She looked radiant. She looked like a thief who had gotten away with the heist of the century and was currently spending the money in front of the bank she robbed. Chase stood beside her, looking vaguely uncomfortable in a navy suit that pulled slightly at the shoulders. He kept shifting his weight, his eyes darting toward the entrance every few minutes. He was sweating. A thin sheen of moisture coated his upper lip. Chase was always sweating when he felt guilty, a physical tell he couldn't suppress. He hadn't looked at me once since I walked in. Coward. "They look happy, don't they, Claire?" my aunt whispered loudly, appearing at my elbow. She smelled like mothballs and gin. "Thrilled," I muttered, taking a sip of the warm Prosecco. It went down like battery acid. "It's so mature of you to be here. Really. Family first." I didn't answer. I wasn't here out of maturity. I was here because staying home meant letting Chloe win the narrative. She wanted me broken, sobbing into a pillow, the tragic, discarded older sister. Showing up in a backless emerald green slip dress with sharp eyeliner and a careless smile was my middle finger to her. It was exhausting. Beneath the silk, my skin felt tight, my muscles coiled like rusted springs ready to snap. Then, the heavy steel doors at the back of the hall opened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The low, thrumming hum of chatter died almost instantly, replaced by a suffocating silence. Roman stepped inside. He didn't just enter a room. He annexed it. He wore a charcoal bespoke suit that absorbed the terrible lighting and made it look intentional. No tie. The top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, revealing a sliver of olive skin. Silver salted his dark hair at the temples, but there was nothing soft or aged about him. He moved with the quiet, terrifying grace of an apex predator, stepping into a cage of trembling rabbits. 2 men walked exactly 3 paces behind him, thick-necked, quiet men whose eyes scanned the room with professional paranoia. Chase visibly flinched. He dropped Chloe's hand, wiping his palm on his trousers. Roman was Chase's father, but looking at them, you'd never know it. Chase was soft edges, nervous smiles and apologies. Roman was carved out of granite and violence. "Dad," Chase croaked, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "You came." Roman didn't smile. His gaze swept over the cheap decorations, the plastic cups, the terrified suburban relatives. "I received an invitation." His voice was low, gravelly, carrying an accent that was mostly erased, but still lingered on the vowels, a remnant of a very different life in a very different neighborhood. Chloe stepped forward, pasting on a bright, desperate smile. "Mr. Falco, we're so honored. Let me get you a plate. The chicken is—" "I don't eat chicken," Roman said flatly, cutting her off. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were scanning the room. They passed over my aunt, over the DJ packing away a cable, and finally, they landed on me. My breath caught. It wasn't a gasp, just a sudden, sharp halt of oxygen in my lungs. Across the 50 feet of scuffed linoleum, his gaze locked onto mine. His eyes were the color of wet asphalt, dark and unreadable to anyone else, but I saw the micro-expression, the slight, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth, the heavy, possessive slide of his gaze down the slope of my neck, to the dip of my collarbone, and back up. My skin flushed violently. The memory of his hands, calloused, rough, bruising my hips just 3 hours ago in his penthouse, flashed through my mind with the force of a physical blow. The faint scent of cedar and gunpowder still clung to my hair, buried beneath my own perfume. He knew it. I knew it. I raised my plastic cup to him in a slow, cynical mock toast. Roman's jaw tightened. He broke eye contact, finally looking at his son. "So, you are getting married?" "Yes, sir," Chase said, shrinking. "To the sister," Roman added, his tone entirely conversational, but dripping with a lethality that made my aunt step backward. Chloe's smile faltered. We couldn't help falling in love." Roman finally looked at Chloe. The absolute disdain in his eyes was so cold it could have shattered glass. "Love," he repeated softly. He reached into his jacket pocket. The 2 bodyguards shifted. Half the room held its breath. He pulled out a thick envelope and tossed it onto the gift table. It landed with a heavy, muffled thud. Cash. A lot of it. "Congratulations," Roman said. He didn't wait for a thank you. He turned and walked back toward the doors. But right before he pushed through, he stopped, glancing over his shoulder, directly at me. "Claire," he called out. The syllables of my name sounded entirely different in his mouth, heavier, darker. The entire room turned to look at me. Chase stared, his mouth slightly open. Chloe glared. "Your tire is low," Roman said, perfectly deadpan. "I'll have my driver put air in it before you leave." I swallowed hard, keeping my face blank. "Thank you, Mr. Falco." "Drive safe," he murmured, and then he was gone, taking all the oxygen in the room with him. Chloe rounded on me immediately, her acrylic nails digging into her palms. "Why is he talking to you? You don't even have a car here. You took an Uber." "He must be confused," I said, dropping my plastic cup into a trash can. It hit the bottom with a hollow thwack. "Excuse me, I need a cigarette." I walked out the side exit, pushing through the heavy fire door into the cool night air. The alley smelled of rotting dumpster sludge and wet asphalt, but right then it was the sweetest thing I'd ever breathed. My hands were shaking. I dug a crushed pack of Marlboros from my clutch, striking a match. The flare illuminated the dark alleyway. "You're a terrible liar." I jumped, dropping the match. It sizzled out in a puddle. Roman was standing in the shadows by the brick wall, the cherry of his own cigar glowing dull red. He stepped forward into the faint yellow light of the street lamp. Up close, the imposing aura around him was suffocating. He smelled like expensive tobacco, sharp mint, and something inherently dangerous. "You shouldn't have done that in there," I whispered, pulling my shawl tighter around my shoulders. "They'll talk." "Let them," Roman rumbled, stopping inches from me. He reached out, his large, scarred hand brushing a stray curl away from my cheek. His fingers were warm. Rough. "Did you enjoy the show, little bird?" "I hate it when you call me that. I lied, leaning slightly into his touch despite myself. He chuckled, a low, vibrating sound in his chest. You hate a lot of things. My son. Mostly. I don't care enough about Chase to hate him anymore, I said, staring at the knot of his throat. Roman's hand slid to the back of my neck, his thumb pressing into the pulse point there. His grip was entirely unyielding, a reminder of exactly who had the power. Good, because he's a weak man. And you. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of my ear, sending a violent shiver down my spine. You require someone who won't break when you push. 6 months earlier, it had been raining. Not a romantic, cinematic drizzle, but a cold, miserable downpour that smelled like worms and exhaust fumes. I remembered the rain because my socks were soaked through, squishing inside my boots as I stood in the kitchen of the apartment I shared with Chase. The apartment smelled like burned toast and panic. I had come home early from my shift at the hospital. I was a radiology tech. I spent my days looking at the broken insides of people, analyzing fractures and tumors. But I didn't need an X-ray to see the absolute devastation sitting at my kitchen island. Chase was pale, his hands trembling as he gripped a coffee mug. Chloe was sitting next to him, her eyes red, clutching a soggy tissue. "What's going on?" I had asked, dropping my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. The clatter was deafening in the silence. Chloe burst into fresh, dramatic tears. She covered her face, her shoulders heaving. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I'm so sorry." I froze. A cold, heavy stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. "Did someone die? Is it Mom?" "No," Chase said hoarsely. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw it. The guilt. The cowardly, pathetic guilt. Chloe and I." He couldn't even finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was pressurized. It felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. I looked at the two of them. My sister. My boyfriend of 4 years. The man I had picked out curtain patterns with. The man whose student loans I had helped pay. How long? My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded thin, metallic. "It wasn't planned," Chloe wailed, reaching out to touch my arm. I violently recoiled, stepping back so fast I slammed into the refrigerator. "Don't touch me." I asked how long. Chase swallowed. 3 months. It started at your birthday dinner, when you got called into work. My birthday. 3 months ago. I remembered kissing him goodbye, apologizing for the hospital calling me in. I remembered Chloe offering to stay and help him clean up the dishes. Nausea hit me in a massive wave. It tasted like bile and old coffee. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My brain simply short-circuited, shutting down all non-essential functions. I turned around, walked into the bedroom, and pulled a black garbage bag from the bottom of the closet. I started throwing things into it. Shoes, sweaters, a handful of underwear. "Claire, please, let's talk about this," Chase pleaded from the doorway. I grabbed a heavy ceramic lamp from the nightstand and hurled it at the wall next to his head. It shattered into 100 pieces, showering the carpet with sharp fragments and white dust. Chase flinched, holding his hands up. "Get out of my way," I said. I walked out into the rain. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. The city turned into a blur of neon lights bleeding on wet pavement. Hours later, I found myself in a bar called the Rusty Nail. It was a dive in the worst sense of the word. It smelled strongly of bleach, stale urine, and cheap draft beer. The floor was sticky. The bartender looked like he had done hard time, and the patrons looked like they were currently avoiding it. I sat in a cracked vinyl booth in the back, nursing a glass of whiskey that tasted like gasoline. I had stopped crying an hour ago. Now, there was just a hollow, scraping emptiness inside my chest. "Hey, sweetheart." A man slid into the booth opposite me. He wore a damp leather jacket and smelled of stale sweat and cheap weed. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "I'm not interested," I said, staring at my glass. "I didn't ask if you were interested. I asked what a pretty thing like you is doing crying in a shithole like this." He reached across the table, his dirty fingers wrapping around my wrist. Panic spiked, sharp and metallic in the back of my throat. I tried to yank my arm back, but his grip was surprisingly strong. "Let go of me," I hissed. "Come on, just one drink." A hand clamped down on the man's shoulder. It wasn't a gentle tap. It was a grip that dug into the nerve clusters. The man in the leather jacket let out a sharp yelp, releasing my wrist instantly as he twisted in pain. I looked up. Roman Falco stood there. He was wearing a black wool overcoat that was perfectly dry, despite the storm outside. He looked entirely out of place in the grime of the dive bar, yet perfectly at ease with the violence he was currently inflicting. I only knew him from photographs and a brief, stiff introduction at a dinner 2 years ago. Chase kept his father at arm's length. "He's in the import-export business," Chase had said once, his eyes darting away. "It's better we don't ask." "I believe the lady told you to let go," Roman said. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the noise of the bar like a straight razor. "Man, back off, I was just—" The guy tried to stand, but Roman simply applied more pressure to his shoulder. I heard a distinct pop. The man screamed, dropping to his knees beside the booth. Roman didn't even look at him. His dark eyes were fixed on me. "Get up." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "What?" I said. "Get up." Roman released the writhing man on the floor, wiped his hand on a pristine white handkerchief he pulled from his pocket, and tossed it onto the table. "You're a mess, Claire." "How do you know my name?" I stammered, sliding out of the booth. My legs were shaking. "I make it a point to know who my idiot son is sleeping with, and from the looks of you, I'd say he's finally managed to ruin it." Roman turned on his heel, expecting me to follow. I should have run the other way. Every instinct I had, every survival mechanism hammered it into me, screamed that Roman Falco was infinitely more dangerous than the creep bleeding on the floor. But I didn't run. I picked up my purse and followed the devil out into the rain. A black town car sat idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the heavy sheets of rain. A massive man with a flattened nose opened the rear door. Roman got in, and I slid in after him. The interior of the car smelled like expensive leather and cold air conditioning. It was utterly silent, the chaos of the city muted by bulletproof glass. Roman poured amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 heavy tumblers. He handed one to me. "Drink." I took a sip. It didn't burn like the gasoline in the bar. It slid down my throat like velvet fire, warming the icy knot in my stomach. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. Roman scoffed, swirling the liquor in his glass. "I don't help people, Claire. I clean up messes. My son is a mess." He cheated on me, with my sister. The words felt heavy, jagged, tearing at my throat as I finally said them out loud to someone. Roman didn't offer pity. He didn't offer a comforting pat on the arm. He just stared out the window at the blurred streetlights. Chase has always taken what is easily available. He has no spine, no discipline. He is his mother's child. The cruelty in his assessment was breathtaking. He was talking about his own flesh and blood, with the detachment of an auditor writing off a bad asset. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, gripping the leather seat. "My hotel. You need a shower, and you smell like a wet, stray dog." Under normal circumstances, I would have slapped him, or demanded to be let out. But the sheer audacity of the insult, combined with the utter ruin of my life just hours prior, forced a hysterical, broken laugh from my chest. Roman turned his head, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. It wasn't a sexual look, not yet. It was predatory, evaluative. Like a jeweler examining a flawed diamond to see if it would shatter under the chisel. "You're angry," he noted. "I'm devastated," I corrected him, the laugh dying in my throat. "Devastation is useless. It makes you weak. Anger, however." Roman leaned closer, his broad shoulders blocking out the dim streetlights from the window. "Anger is a tool. It gives you teeth." "Do you have teeth, Claire? Or are you just going to let them walk all over you?" I stared into his dark, flat eyes. The scent of him, ozone, tobacco, and expensive soap, was intoxicating. It grounded me in a moment that felt entirely surreal. The car glided into an underground parking garage. The driver opened the door, and Roman led me to a private elevator. He pressed a button requiring a keycard, and we shot upward in silence. His penthouse was stark, minimalist, cold, polished concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling, glittering city, and furniture that looked angular and uncomfortable. There were no personal photos, no clutter. It felt less like a home and more like a tactical base. "Guest room is down the hall. Towels are in the cabinet," Roman said, discarding his overcoat on a leather chair. He loosened his collar. "Shower. Then we will talk." I stood in his massive slate-tiled bathroom for 30 minutes, letting the scalding water beat down on my neck. I scrubbed my skin until it was red, trying to wash away the smell of the dive bar, the smell of Chase, the smell of Chloe's betrayal. When I finally stepped out, I found a heavy, black silk robe folded neatly on the counter. It belonged to Roman. It swallowed me whole, pooling at my ankles, smelling faintly of his cologne. I walked back out into the living area. Roman was sitting at a glass dining table, a laptop open in front of him, a fresh cigar clamped between his teeth. He had changed into a dark grey t-shirt and loose trousers. The casual clothing made him look larger, the heavy musculature of his shoulders and arms no longer hidden by a tailored suit. Scars crisscrossed his left forearm, white, jagged lines that told stories of knives and close calls. He closed the laptop as I approached. "Better?" "Yes. Thank you." I clutched the lapels of the robe together. "I should call a cab." "Sit down," he commanded. It wasn't a request. I sat cautiously on the edge of the leather chair opposite him. "Chase will marry her," Roman stated flatly, tapping the ash from his cigar into a heavy crystal tray. "He feels guilty. Weak men always try to legitimize their mistakes, to absolve themselves of guilt." I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting a fresh wave of nausea. "I didn't ask for your predictions. I am giving you facts. Now, you have a choice. You can disappear, cry. Let them have the satisfaction of breaking you." Roman leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on the glass table. "Or you can stay here." My eyes snapped open. "Excuse me?" "You need a place to stay. I have an empty penthouse. I travel frequently. You will be out of their way, but you will not be homeless." "Why would you do that?" My heart started to race. "You said you don't help people." "I don't, but I despise my son's cowardice. And I find you." Roman paused, his gaze slowly dragging down my neck, lingering on the V of the black silk robe where my collarbones were exposed. interesting. The shift in the air was instantaneous. The sheer, crushing weight of his attention hit me like a physical force. My breathing grew shallow. "I'm not going to sleep with you for rent, Mr. Falco," I said, my voice trembling but defiant. Roman laughed, a dark, terrifying sound. "If I wanted to buy a woman, Claire, I assure you, I wouldn't do it with a spare bedroom. I offer you sanctuary. Nothing more." He stood up, towering over me. "The choice is yours." He walked away, retreating into the master suite, leaving me alone in the dark, silent penthouse. I stayed. For the first 2 weeks, we barely spoke. We were like two ghosts occupying the same space. I worked my shifts at the hospital, returning to the penthouse exhausted and numb. Roman was often gone, returning at odd hours, smelling of cigar smoke and things I didn't want to think about. But the tension between us was a living, breathing thing. It crackled in the air when we passed each other in the kitchen. It settled heavily on my skin when I caught him watching me read on the couch, his dark eyes tracking the movement of my fingers as I turned a page. The dam broke on a Tuesday. I had received a text from Chloe, a picture of her and Chase, smiling, holding up a lease agreement for a new apartment. "Thought you should know. We're making it official. Hope you're healing, sis. Etsugetsu." I stared at the phone until the screen blurred with hot, furious tears. I didn't cry from sadness. I cried from the sheer, impotent rage of it. They were building a life on the ashes of mine, and they were proud of it. I threw the phone at the wall. It cracked, sliding down to the floor. Roman appeared in the doorway of his study, holding a glass of scotch. He looked at the shattered phone, then at me. My chest was heaving, my hands balled into fists. "She sent a picture," I choked out, hating how pathetic I sounded. Roman set his glass down on a side table. He crossed the room slowly, his bare feet making no sound on the polished concrete. He stopped right in front of me. I refused to look away, tilting my head back to meet his gaze. "You're crying over garbage," he said softly. "I'm angry," I whispered, a tear escaping and tracking down my cheek. Roman reached up. He didn't wipe the tear away gently. He pressed his rough thumb hard against my cheekbone, smearing the wetness away with enough pressure to leave a mark. Then bite back. I didn't think. I just reacted. The raw, violent grief in my chest needed an outlet, and the terrifying, commanding man in front of me was the only solid thing in the room. I grabbed the front of his t-shirt and pulled him down. His mouth crashed onto mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. Roman groaned, a guttural sound of pure possession, his large hands immediately coming up to grip my jaw, holding me in place as he forced my lips apart. He tasted like scotch and smoke and absolute dominance. He backed me up until I hit the wall, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs, but he replaced it with his own. My fingers tangled in his dark hair, gripping tight as he kissed down my jaw, biting down on my neck with enough force to make me gasp. It was reckless. It was wrong. He was dangerous, a man with blood on his hands, the father of the man who ruined me. But as his heavy body pressed me against the cold wall, silencing the noise in my head, I realized something terrifying. I didn't care. I was falling for the devil, and I was going to drag them all to hell with me. Morning light in Roman's penthouse didn't wake you. It interrogated you. It slashed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, sharp and unforgiving, highlighting every flaw in the room. That first morning, it highlighted the purpling bruises on my hips. I woke up alone in the massive bed. The sheets smelled of cedar, sweat, and sex. My muscles ached with a deep, throbbing soreness that made me wince as I pushed myself up against the headboard. I touched my neck. A phantom sting blossomed where Roman's teeth had scraped my skin. With Chase, mornings were lazy. He would hit snooze 4 times, bury his face in my hair, and complain about his back. We would make mediocre coffee and split a stale bagel. It was comfortable. It was pathetic. I dragged myself out of bed, shivering as my bare feet hit the polished concrete floor. I found one of Roman's white dress shirts draped over a chair and put it on. The cotton was heavy, expensive, and cold against my skin. I found him in the kitchen. He was fully dressed in a tailored black suit, his dark hair slicked back, a gold watch glinting on his thick wrist. He was reading a tablet and drinking espresso from a tiny white cup. He didn't look like a man who had spent the last 6 hours taking me apart on the living room wall and putting me back together in his bed. He looked like a machine. "There is aspirin by the sink," he said, without looking up from his screen. I walked over to the marble island. 2 white pills sat perfectly aligned next to a glass of water. "I don't need aspirin," I lied. My voice sounded gravelly. Wrecked. Roman finally looked at me. His eyes slowly dragged up my bare legs, lingering on the hem of his shirt, resting mid-thigh before meeting my gaze. There was no warmth in his expression, no morning-after awkwardness, just absolute, terrifying ownership. "You bruise easily," he noted, his voice flat. "You don't hold back," I countered. I picked up the glass of water and drank it all. My hands were shaking slightly. Roman set his tablet down. He walked around the island, his heavy footsteps utterly silent. He stopped right in front of me, invading my space so completely I forgot how to breathe. He reached out, hooking a thick finger under the collar of the shirt, pulling me an inch closer. "I never hold back, Claire. If you expect gentleness, pack your bags now. I am not my son." "I know exactly who you are," I whispered. He tilted his head, his dark eyes searching mine for any trace of fear. When he found none, a slow, predatory smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "Good. My driver will take you to work. Tonight, we have a dinner. Be ready by 7. He dropped his hand, grabbed his overcoat, and walked out. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, leaving me standing in the echoing silence of the kitchen. Over the next few months, that became our normal. There were no declarations of love, no romantic dinners. We were a collision of mutual destruction. I fed off the power he wielded, the absolute certainty with which he moved through the world. In return, I gave him my submission behind closed doors. It was a transactional brutality, and it healed the broken parts of me faster than therapy ever could. Chase and Chloe faded into a dull, irritating background noise. They were planning their wedding. My mother kept calling, leaving tearful voicemails begging me to be the bigger person and forgive my sister. I deleted them all. I didn't care about being the bigger person anymore. I wanted to be the person holding the match, which brought us to the engagement party at the VFW hall and the aftermath that followed. 2 weeks after the party, the intercom buzzed in the penthouse. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on the leather sofa, drinking a glass of Cabernet and reading a medical journal. Roman was in his study, the door partially open. He had been conducting hushed, terse phone calls in Italian all morning. "Sir," the doorman's voice crackled over the speaker, "your son is here. He says he has an appointment." Roman walked out of the study. He had taken his suit jacket off, his shoulder-holstered gun clearly visible against his white shirt. He hit the button on the wall. "Send him up." I froze, the wine glass halfway to my mouth. "Chase is coming up here." "Yes, Roman said, turning to look at me. He needs money. He's trying to start a logistics company. He wants seed capital. Panic, sharp and metallic, spiked in my chest. I need to hide. He can't see me here. I stood up, nearly spilling my wine, and turned toward the master bedroom. But Roman moved faster. He caught my wrist, his grip iron tight, stopping me dead in my tracks. You hide from no one, Roman said softly, his eyes darkening. Especially not from a coward. Roman, please, the fallout is mine to manage. You will sit exactly where you are. He released my wrist, his voice dropping an octave into an absolute command. Pour yourself another glass, cross your legs, and when he walks out of that elevator, you will look at him like he is nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. But looking into Roman's eyes, the panic began to curdle into something else. Something hot. Spite. I sat back down. I smoothed out the skirt of my dress, a dark plum sheath that Roman had bought me, tailoring perfectly to my hips. I picked up my wine. I crossed my legs. The private elevator dinged. The heavy steel doors slid open. Chase stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase that looked brand new and entirely too stiff. Chloe was right behind him, wearing a pastel pink trench coat and clutching her designer knockoff handbag like a shield. They smelled like wet wool and anxiety. Dad, thanks for... Chase started, stepping into the foyer. He stopped. His mouth snapped shut. His eyes darted from Roman, who was pouring a scotch at the bar, to me, sitting on the sofa. The silence in the penthouse was suffocating. It stretched out, heavy and lethal. Chloe peeked around Chase's shoulder. Her jaw physically dropped. Claire? What? What are you doing here? I took a slow sip of my wine. It tasted like dark berries and ash. Hello, Chloe. Chase. Chase looked like he had been struck by lightning. His eyes bounced frantically around the room, taking in my bare feet, the casual way I sat on the expensive furniture, the half-empty bottle of wine on the glass table. Then his eyes snapped to Roman. Dad, what is this? Chase's voice trembled. Roman didn't look at him. He dropped 2 ice cubes into his glass with a loud clink. Take a seat, Chase. Explain to me why I should throw $500,000 into a failing trucking route. No, Chase stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. No, I'm asking you why my ex-girlfriend is sitting in your living room. Roman finally turned around. He leaned against the bar, swirling his scotch. He looked at his son with the kind of clinical disgust one reserves for a squashed insect on a clean floor. Claire lives here. Chloe let out a sharp, hysterical gasp. Lives here? Are you insane? She's your son's ex. She is my woman, Roman corrected, his voice dangerously soft. The words hit the room like a concussive blast. Chase physically recoiled. He dropped his briefcase. It hit the concrete floor with a heavy thud, popping open, scattering printed business plans across the floor. You're sleeping with her. I am doing a lot more than that, Roman said flatly. The utter, soul-crushing humiliation on Chase's face was intoxicating. The man who had lied to me, who had snuck around behind my back in my own apartment, was currently watching his terrifying father claim me as his own. You're sick, Chase whispered, backing up toward the elevator. Both of you. You did this to get back at me, Claire? You're a whore. Before the word fully left Chase's mouth, Roman moved. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply crossed the room with explosive, predatory speed. He grabbed Chase by the throat, slamming him backward into the stainless steel doors of the elevator. The impact rattled the metal frame. Chloe screamed, covering her mouth, backing away. Roman's thick forearm was pressed against Chase's windpipe, lifting him an inch off the floor. Chase's hand scrambled desperately at his father's arm, his face turning a deep, mottled red. "Apologize," Roman whispered. His face was inches from his son's. "Or I will crush your larynx." Chase choked, his eyes wide, terrified, pleading. He nodded frantically. Roman eased the pressure by a fraction of an inch. "Sorry," Chase rasped, staring at me over his father's thick shoulder. "I'm sorry." Roman dropped him. Chase collapsed onto his hands and knees, coughing violently, gasping for air. Roman straightened his cuffs, looking down at his son. "Your business plan is rejected. The wedding gift I left at the party is the last money you will ever receive from me. Do not contact me again. Do not look at her again." He reached out and pressed the button for the elevator. The doors slid open. "Get your trash off my floor," Roman ordered. Chloe, crying hysterically now, dropped to her knees and scrambled to gather the scattered papers. She shoved them into the broken briefcase. She grabbed Chase by the arm, hauling him into the elevator. Just before the doors closed, Chloe looked at me. Her eyes were red, mascara running down her cheeks. Her perfect illusion of a happy, stolen life was completely shattered. I raised my wine glass to her. The doors slid shut. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the elevator descending. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to put the glass down on the table. The adrenaline was slowly leaking out of my system, leaving me cold and nauseous. Roman walked over to the sofa. He didn't sit down. He stood in front of me, his chest rising and falling slightly. He reached down, grabbing my chin, tilting my face up to meet his dark, violent eyes. "Are you satisfied?" he asked. "Yes," I breathed. "Good." He released my chin. "Because the games are over. You are mine now, Claire, in the light and in the dark." The dark was not a metaphor. 2 nights later, the illusion that Roman was just a wealthy, ruthless businessman evaporated, leaving behind the cold, metallic stench of gunpowder. We were at a private club in the city's basement level, a place without signs, where the air was thick with blue cigar smoke, and the lighting was entirely provided by low-hanging brass lamps. I was wearing a black silk slip dress, sitting beside Roman in a curved leather booth. I had learned to keep my face perfectly blank in these settings. I was the ornament, the untouchable property. Across the table sat a man named Dominic. He was older, with a pockmarked face and a gold tooth that caught the light when he smiled. He didn't smile often. He was flanked by 3 men who kept their hands inside their jackets. Roman sat back, his arm draped possessively over the back of the booth behind my shoulders. His fingers idly played with the ends of my hair. "The shipments from the docks are light, Roman," Dominic rasped, tapping a manicured fingernail against his whiskey glass. 3 weeks in a row. My buyers are asking questions. It makes us both look incompetent. "Your men are stealing from the crates before they hit the warehouse," Roman replied, his tone conversational. He took a slow drag from his cigar. "I run a clean port. If there is a leak, it is on your end. I suggest you plug it." Dominic's smile vanished. His eyes darted to me, lingering heavily on the exposed skin of my chest. It was a calculated insult. In their world, looking at another man's woman with obvious hunger was a challenge. "Maybe you're distracted," Dominic sneered, his gaze crawling back to Roman. "Playing house with your boy's leftovers. Word is Chase threw her out, and you picked up the garbage." The silence that fell over the table was absolute. The background jazz music seemed to fade away. The 3 men standing behind Dominic shifted their weight, bracing themselves. I didn't breathe. My heart slammed against my ribs. I looked at Roman. His expression hadn't changed. He didn't look angry. He looked dead. Slowly, Roman took the cigar from his mouth and set it in the heavy glass ashtray. He leaned forward. "Dominic," Roman said softly. "Yeah?" Roman moved so fast my eyes couldn't track it. He grabbed the heavy, jagged crystal decanter from the center of the table and brought it down across Dominic's face with sickening, explosive force. The sound of shattering bone and glass was deafening. Dominic screamed, falling backward out of the booth, clutching his ruined face as blood instantly poured through his fingers, staining his white collar crimson. Before Dominic's men could even draw their weapons, Roman's own men, two shadows who had been standing by the door, had their guns drawn and leveled at their heads. Roman didn't draw a weapon. He stood up slowly, picking up a cloth napkin from the table. He wiped a single drop of blood off his knuckles. He looked down at Dominic, who was writhing on the sticky floor, making wet, choking sounds. "Clean out your desk at the port by morning," Roman said, his voice echoing in the dead silent club. "If I see your face in my city again, I will cut it off." Roman dropped the bloody napkin onto Dominic's chest. He turned to me. He held out his hand. I was paralyzed. The smell of copper was overwhelming. It coated the back of my throat, making me want to gag. This wasn't a corporate boardroom argument. This was brutal, animalistic violence. I stared at the blood pooling on the floor, mixing with spilled whiskey. "Claire!" Roman commanded. I looked up into his eyes. They were completely devoid of remorse. They were waiting. If I took his hand, there was no going back. I couldn't claim ignorance anymore. I couldn't pretend he was just a rough businessman. If I took his hand, I was stepping over a bleeding man and accepting the monster for exactly what he was. I thought about Chase's weak, sweaty face. I thought about Chloe's fake tears. I thought about a lifetime of being good, of following the rules, of taking the high road, and getting entirely destroyed for it. I reached out and placed my hand in Roman's. His long fingers closed around mine, rough and warm. He pulled me out of the booth, shielding my body with his own as we walked past the men holding guns. We got into the back of the waiting town car in silence. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing us inside the dark, leather-scented cocoon. The car sped away from the club. Roman poured a scotch. His knuckles were bruised, the skin split slightly. "You're shaking," he observed, handing me the glass. I took it with both hands, taking a large gulp. It burned on the way down. "You shattered his face. He disrespected you. He disrespected me." Roman took the glass from my hands, setting it aside. He pulled me across the leather seat, forcing me to straddle his lap. His hands gripped my hips, his thumbs pressing into the bruises he had left there days ago. "Are you afraid of me, Claire?" he murmured against my throat, his breath hot against my skin. I closed my eyes, tangling my fingers in his hair. The smell of cigar smoke, gunpowder, and blood clung to him. It was terrifying. It was intoxicating. "No," I lied, my voice trembling. Roman bit down hard on my collarbone, making me gasp. "Good, because I am never letting you go." Working the night shift in the radiology department used to feel like a sanctuary. The hum of the MRI machine, the sharp smell of antiseptic, the sterile, blinding white of the fluorescent lights. It was a world composed entirely of facts, bone density, and grey matter. 6 months into my arrangement with Roman, that sanctuary felt like wearing an itchy, ill-fitting sweater. I sat in the dark viewing room, scrolling through a cross-section of a shattered femur. My thumb traced the jagged white line on the screen. I didn't feel the sympathetic wince I used to get when looking at trauma. Instead, my mind drifted to the sickening crunch of Dominic's face hitting the table at the club. I had stopped having nightmares about it weeks ago. That realization should have terrified me. It didn't. My phone vibrated against the metal desk, vibrating hard enough to rattle my lukewarm coffee. Unknown number. I let it ring. It buzzed again, relentless, vibrating its way toward the edge of the desk. I snatched it up, pressing it to my ear without speaking. "Claire." The voice was thin, reedy, and choked with mucus. "Chloe." I hadn't heard my sister's voice since the elevator doors closed on her tear-streaked face. I leaned back in my ergonomic mesh chair, staring blankly at the fractured bone on my monitor. "How did you get this number?" "Mom," she sobbed, a wet, pathetic sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Please don't hang up. Please, Claire, I have nowhere else to go." "Call Chase," I said, my voice dead. "He's gone," she choked out, her breathing ragged. "He took the last of the money from our joint account 3 days ago. He owes people, Claire. Bad people." They came to the apartment. They smashed everything. I'm sleeping in my car in a Walmart parking lot. A cold, heavy silence settled over the line. A year ago, the thought of my little sister sleeping in a freezing sedan would have sent me running into the night with my checkbook and a blanket. Now, I just felt a dull, scraping irritation. She had made her bed. She had made it with the man I loved, and now she was lying in the ashes of it. "Put on a sweater," I told her. "Claire, you're sleeping with a monster!" Chloe shrieked, her desperation cracking into anger. "He ruined Chase. He blacklisted him everywhere in the city. You did this to us." "You did this to yourself," I whispered. "You stole a coward, Chloe. You just didn't expect to inherit his debts. Do not call this number again." I ended the call, blocking the number immediately. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked down at my knuckles, expecting them to be shaking, but they were entirely still. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., the city was draped in a thick, freezing fog. It smelled of wet asphalt and stale exhaust. Leo, the mountain of a man Roman had assigned as my permanent shadow, was leaning against the black SUV parked idling by the ambulance bay. He didn't speak. He just opened the rear door. I slid into the leather interior, closing my eyes as the heated seats began to thaw the chill from my bones. "The boss is waiting at the harbor," Leo grunted from the front seat, putting the car in drive. "Take me home first," I said, rubbing my temples. "I need a shower." He said harbor. Leo didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't argue. Roman's commands were absolute, and challenging them in front of his men was a line I hadn't crossed. The harbor at dawn was a desolate industrial graveyard. Massive steel shipping containers loomed like rusted monoliths in the fog. The air tasted heavily of salt, diesel fuel, and dead fish. We pulled up to a corrugated metal warehouse at the very edge of Pier 4. The heavy bay doors were rolled up, revealing harsh yellow work lights cutting through the gloom. Roman was standing near a stack of wooden crates. He was wearing a heavy black peacoat, the collar turned up against the biting wind, smoking a cigar. 2 of his men stood by the entrance, their posture rigid, hands buried in their jacket pockets. I stepped out of the SUV, my hospital scrubs offering zero protection against the freezing wind. I crossed the damp concrete, my sneakers making soft, squelching sounds. Roman turned as I approached. His eyes, dark and unreadable, swept over my tired face. He didn't smile. He reached out, pulling me against his heavy chest, wrapping his coat around my shivering shoulders. The smell of his cologne, mixed with tobacco and the sharp metallic tang of the harbor, flooded my senses. "You're freezing," he murmured, his rough jaw brushing against my temple. "You dragged me to a dock in the middle of winter," I muttered into his chest, letting my eyes close for a fraction of a second. "What are we doing here, Roman?" "Tying up loose ends." He turned me slightly, keeping his heavy arm anchored around my waist. A man was kneeling on the concrete floor between two shipping containers. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. His face was a swollen, bruised mess of purple flesh and dried blood. He was shivering violently, wearing only a thin, torn dress shirt. It took me 3 full seconds to recognize him. Chase. My stomach plummeted. A sickening rush of adrenaline hit my bloodstream, making my ears ring. I grabbed the lapel of Roman's coat, my fingers digging into the wool. Chase looked up, squinting through one eye that wasn't completely swollen shut. When he saw me standing under his father's arm, a ragged, wet sob tore from his throat. "Claire," he choked out, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the concrete. "Claire, please, tell him. Tell him I didn't know." "He was caught trying to break into one of my secure containers last night," Roman said smoothly, as if discussing a slight dip in the stock market. "With a crowbar and a borrowed truck. He planned to steal enough to pay off his gambling debts, then flee the state." I stared at the pathetic, broken man kneeling in the dirt. This was the man I had planned to marry, the man whose laundry I had folded. He looked incredibly small. "I was desperate," Chase screamed, fighting against the plastic restraints. "You took everything from me. You took my business. You took my fiancé. I took out the trash," Roman corrected, his voice dropping to a low, lethal timbre that vibrated against my side. Chase looked at me, his face contorting into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. "You loved me. You're a nurse, for God's sake. You heal people. Look at what he's turning you into. You're a whore for a murderer." Roman moved. He unholstered the matte black pistol from his shoulder harness so fast it was just a blur of motion. He racked the slide, a sharp metallic clack that echoed violently in the cavernous warehouse, and leveled it directly at Chase's head. "Roman, stop." The words ripped from my throat before I could think. I grabbed his forearm, wrapping both my hands around his thick wrist. His arm felt like a steel beam. Roman froze. He didn't lower the gun. He slowly turned his head to look down at me. His eyes were completely devoid of light. "Defending him, Claire? After everything?" "No," I breathed, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I'm not defending him." I looked at Chase. He was weeping openly now, a puddle of urine spreading out from his knees on the cold concrete. The smell of it hit the air, sharp and pathetic. There was no victory in this. There was no triumphant closure. It was just sad, ugly, and pathetic. "He's nothing," I said, looking back up into Roman's terrifying face. "Killing him implies he's a threat. He's not. He's just a rat drowning in his own filth. If you shoot him, you make him a martyr in your own head. Put the gun away." Roman stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The tension in his arm was a coiled spring, begging to be released. I squeezed his wrist tighter. I wasn't begging for Chase's life. I was cementing my place in Roman's. I was proving I wasn't just a pet kept in a penthouse. I was a partner who could look at the violence and steer it. Slowly, agonizingly, Roman lowered the weapon. He thumbed the safety back on and slid it into his holster. He looked down at his son. "You are stripped of my name. If you are found within the city limits by sundown, my men will put you in the incinerator, and I will not lose a second of sleep. Run." One of the men stepped forward, slicing the zip ties with a pocket knife. Chase didn't say a word. He scrambled to his feet, slipping once in his own mess, and ran toward the open bay doors, disappearing into the thick, grey fog. He didn't look back. Roman turned to me. He reached out, his rough, calloused fingers cupping my jaw. He tilted my face up. "You spared him." "I spared my rug," I countered, my voice shaking just slightly, a raw admission of the adrenaline crashing through my system. "I didn't want his blood on your shoes." A slow, dark smile curved Roman's lips. It was a terrifying expression, full of teeth and possession. He leaned down, his mouth covering mine in a bruising, absolute kiss. It tasted like cold air and violence. I kissed him back, my hands sliding up into his thick hair, anchored to the only solid thing in my utterly ruined, utterly rebuilt life. A year is a strange measurement of time. It can feel like a century when you're grieving, and it can feel like a breath when you are entirely consumed. I quit my job at the hospital. I didn't announce it with a grand speech. I simply handed in my badge one rainy Thursday morning and walked out. The stark, clinical morality of medicine no longer fit the woman I saw in the mirror. She had sharper edges now. She wore bespoke silk and carried a sleek, heavy Smith & Wesson in her designer handbag, perfectly licensed and legally registered, thanks to Roman's aggressive team of lawyers. We were standing on the balcony of the penthouse, the city sprawling out beneath us like a glittering carpet of crushed diamonds. The night air was warm, smelling of ozone and distant rain. I held a crystal flute of champagne, watching the taillights of the cars bleed red along the highway far below. Roman stepped out onto the terrace. He had just finished a 3-hour meeting with the heads of 2 rival factions. He had dismantled their territories with nothing but a fountain pen and a terrifying, quiet stare. He stripped off his suit jacket, tossing it over a deck chair, and rolled up his sleeves, exposing the jagged scars on his forearms. He walked up behind me, his massive chest pressing against my back, his arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against him. "They capitulated," he murmured against the shell of my ear, his breath warm. "Of course they did," I replied, leaning my head back against his shoulder. "They're terrified of you." "They should be terrified of you," he rumbled, his lips brushing the side of my neck. "You drafted the contract clauses that boxed them into the corner." It was true. Over the last year, I had taken over the legitimate side of Roman's empire. The shell companies, the real estate holdings, the complex webs of offshore accounts. I had an eye for finding fractures, a skill honed from years of reading X-rays. Only now, I was looking for fractures in his enemy's armor. "Have you heard anything about him?" Roman asked softly. He didn't need to use a name. Chase was a ghost, a banned word in our home, but his absence still occasionally brushed against the edges of the room. "A rumor," I admitted, taking a sip of the dry champagne. "Leo mentioned he saw a police report, a drug bust in a motel out in Ohio, a John Doe fitting his description." Roman didn't flinch. He didn't tighten his grip. "And the sister?" "Moved back in with my mother," I said, staring out at the city lights. "They sent me a card on my birthday. I burned them." Roman turned me around in his arms. He took the champagne glass from my hand, setting it on the stone railing. The wind whipped my dark hair across my face, and he patiently brushed it back, tucking it behind my ear. His touch was heavy, possessive, and entirely devoted. There was a time when I looked at this man and saw only a terrifying monster, a violent kingpin who ruled through fear and broken bones. I still saw the monster. I knew exactly what he was capable of. I knew the blood that washed down the drain of our massive slate shower, but I also knew the man who carried me to bed when I fell asleep at my desk. The man who destroyed anyone who looked at me with disrespect. The man who looked at my broken, betrayed pieces and didn't offer pity, but handed me a match to burn the world down instead. You look entirely too thoughtful, Roman noted, his dark eyes searching mine. Are you having regrets, Claire? I smiled. It wasn't a sweet, innocent smile. It was a cynical, knowing smirk that mirrored his own. Regrets are for weak people who want to legitimize their mistakes, I said, echoing the words he had spoken to me on the night we met. Roman's chest rumbled with a dark, satisfied laugh. He grabbed my hips, lifting me effortlessly until I was sitting on the wide stone railing of the balcony, a 300-foot drop into the glittering abyss right behind me. I didn't feel a shred of fear. I wrapped my legs around his waist, anchoring myself to him. You are a terrifying creature, little bird, he whispered, his hand sliding up to frame my face. You made me this way. No, he corrected, leaning in until our foreheads rested against each other. I just gave you permission to stop hiding. He kissed me, slow and deep, consuming all the oxygen in my lungs. It was a kiss that tasted like power, absolute loyalty, and the metallic tang of an empire built on ash. My sister had stolen a pathetic boy in a cheap suit, thinking she had won the lottery. Little did she know, she had just handed me the keys to the kingdom, and the devil himself to rule it with. I wasn't the discarded tragic sister anymore. I was the architect of their ruin, and the queen of his dark, violent world. And I wouldn't trade a single second of it. And that is exactly how you turn heartbreak into an empire. Claire didn't just survive the ultimate betrayal. She thrived in the darkness, leaving her sister and her ex in the dust while claiming the throne beside Roman. If this dark, gritty, and fiercely satisfying mafia revenge story had your heart racing, you know what to do. Smash that like button right now to show some love. Share this video with anyone who loves a messy, dramatic, villain-gets-the-girl romance, and subscribe so you never miss another story. Drop a comment below. Would you have spared Chase at the docks? See you in the next one.